Of
of Dev Anand.
Dev Anand. Acha. Um, well, you see, Dev Anand belongs to the generation of my cousin Guru Dutt. And in fact, Dev Anand gave Guru Dutt his first chance as a director. And both were relatively new at that time. Dev Anand, of course, I think preceded Guru Dutt in the film business by about a year or two. But the most important thing, of course, about that whole thing was that how Dev Anand captured the imagination of young people. When I say young people, I mean teenagers and people in their early 20s at the time when he came in into the film business. And that sort of connection with the youth that Devanand had. This is when, I mean, this is, we are talking about still late 1940s and early 1950s. And 60 years later, also, he's had a similar kind of connection with the youth of the country. It's quite extraordinary because I don't believe that there is any film star in India who's had a run as a star and the central protagonist of any film story for that long. I'm sure it's some kind of a record in the whole world, not just in India. Uh, the other thing was that he became not just a youth icon, but people used to imitate everything. Like today, everybody imitates Shah Rukh Khan. Same way in his time, everybody imitated Devanand, particularly the manner in which he walked, the manner in which he talked, and his hairstyle. That was a very distinct kind of style that he had, the way he used to puff up his hair. And that became a kind of, for several generations afterwards, not just one generation. So, in that sense, Devanand, I think, it was quite extraordinary. Continues to be quite extraordinary. But for many, many years, the moment the word Devanand conjured up an image that was quite wonderful, happy-go-lucky, the particular way he lit his cigarette and kept it between his lips, the way he sang his songs, or the way he sang duets with his leading ladies, all these wonderful images of this man. And my earliest memory of him, of course, goes back when I was about, I would think about 10 or so, when Guru Dutt took me to a studio on Kedel Road here in Mumbai. I was visiting Mumbai with an older brother of mine, and I remember Guru Dutt taking us to the studio, and Dev Anand was acting in that film. I don't recollect what film it was. And he had a kind of romantic scene that particular day. So that was my first memory of him. And this is way, way back, I mean, certainly 60 years ago.
Um, your take on the Dev Anand kind of cinema?
You see, Devanand created what one might call a nice, happy go lucky romantic comedy and also the thriller. You see, before him, these two genres were not terribly well known. And when I say romantic comedy, it was, very light-hearted, very much kind of college-going, college-type romance in the cinema. I think he excelled in that. He also excelled in thriller kind of films. And later, of course, he excelled in other kinds of films too, because the great classic film of his, The Guide, for instance, was an extraordinarily beautiful film.
We know that Guru Dutt ji and Dev Anand ji date back to the time when they started in the industry. Anything you can tell us about their relationship?
Whose relationship?
Guru Dutt and Dev Anand ji.
Well, you see, Guru Dutt and Devanand were, as I said, more or less contemporaries. And Guru Dutt, of course, joined the film industry as an assistant dance director, and later on became a dance director and an assistant director to Gyan Mukherjee, a film director called Gyan Mukherjee. And of course, Dev Anand had just entered the film business, and apparently he had told Guru Dutt that whoever gets the first opportunity, the other one will be the main part of that film. So if Devanand gave, as it happened, Devanand gave the first opportunity of direction to Guru Dutt for Bazi, which became a huge hit. It could have gone the other way as well. But in this case, of course, Devanand was the person who helped Guru Dutt make his first film. And they made several films after that, very successfully, one after the other. But there were, I mean, Devanand had then his brother, Goldie, also was a very, very talented director because he directed many of his films. And finally, of course, Devanand started to direct his own films, you know. So he went through this incredible phase, you know, of becoming not just a big star, but a complete filmmaker.
Music has been part in
Yes.
Devanand films.
You see, one of the things about Devanand films that everybody remembers are the lilting songs, absolutely marvelous songs, and a whole lot of people who were music directors. You know, S.D. Burman, for instance, did some of the most marvelous work for Devanand, particularly the music of Guide, if you remember. And you listen to it today, it's as fresh as it was when it was first written and produced, you know.
At the point of time when Devanand emerged as a very big star, he was one of the triangles of that three powerful actors of the industry: Dilip Kumar, Raj Kapoor, and Devanand.
Yeah, see, Raj Kapoor, Devanand, and Dilip Kumar were the kind of triumvirate of their period. Much like today, you know, you have Shah Rukh Khan, Amir Khan, and Salman Khan. Now it's like that, these three. And at that time, too, you had these three. One, of course, was known for his tragic love persona that he created for himself. And then, of course, the other one was the simple person from a small town or a village who has to find his way entirely on his own in a big city, which was Raj Kapoor, which was kind of, you know, happy, sad kind of character. And here was this very happy-go-lucky, you know, adolescent growing into adulthood kind of romantic character. And each one had a very distinct stamp. And of course, Dev Anand, as you well know, I mean, what his stamp was, because that sustained itself over a very, very long period of time.
His stamp was that of the romantic hero. The romantic hero.
Mm.
We still remember him as that was that is the one thing that you always associate Devanand with.
Well, I associate Dev Anand with several things. One, of course, the kind of romantic hero he created, the persona he created for himself. And the other one, I think, is that he is an extremely intelligent and an extremely well-read and an erudite person, you know. And that's something, it's not always that you have people in the film business who are interested in so many things, because Dev Anand was interested in a lot of things. And of course, in the 70s, he even came into politics for a short while. So he had, he's a person whose worldview has been extremely large, wide, and so on. So, you know, his whole attitude to life around him has been one of with great liberal values, you know, which is something that I will always remember him by, because that is the quality he has, which is wonderful.
You said his liberal values, which is reflected in his cinema, also the films that he directed later on in stage.
You see, now you're asking me a question that I cannot answer because I haven't seen many of his films lately.
No, from the time of Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, since
More or
when
less,
age
no,
onwards?
not since. Since I haven't seen. Since then I have not seen. That's what I'm trying to say. So, wrong person to ask.
um, as you said, he had that image of that very happy-go-lucky, and he did films like that, which very happy films, feel-good films. At which at one point of time, even critics were questioning his position with the in that trio of Dilip Kumar, Raj Kapoor. But then he came up with Kala Pani. If you remember his work in Kala Pani.
You see, as I said, he was very good in the genre of thrillers as well. He had, what happens to stars is because they are stars and because of a particular persona that catches the imagination of the people, on the basis of that they become stars. So if you're a star, that becomes your area of functioning. What has made you a star, that's what you will keep doing forever. Otherwise, you're not a star. You can't possibly be a star. So whatever you do, you turn it into what has made you a star. So that is very, very important. And it's the same case with Dev Anand. Otherwise you would think of him as being an actor, character actor, and that sort of thing. But it's not. He's a matinee idol. He's a proper star.
His film Guide.
Guide, you see, Guide is a very fine film from so many points of view, and of course, not the least being R.K. Narayan's story, which is a wonderful story, and it has many dimensions to it. It isn't just a straightforward little story. There are many aspects to it. There's a great study of human nature in that as well. And Dev Anand, who normally didn't play parts like this, gave an extraordinarily good performance.
Films like Guide, their importance in the context of the Indian cinema.
You see, you have to. Indian cinema, yes, it has a place. It has a place. No question about it. Guide has a place, like Sholay has a place, like Mother India has a place. All these pictures, these are landmark films of the Hindi film industry. And without question, that Guide has a place among those films.
As you also said, Dev Anand has been also politically active, especially during the internal emergency, 1977, and he had, I think, organized his own group of people from the industry to protest against the supporters of Indira Gandhi. If you know anything about his political activity.
Unfortunately, I don't know very much about his political phase, because he did become extremely active because he was very, very upset with the emergency, and therefore he did do a great deal because, he was essentially a Democrat and a liberal, and he stood up for his values, which was a wonderful thing for him to have done. I don't know whether he had too much success, but that's not important. He stood up for what he believed in.
He makes films with social relevance, or would you call it his kind of cinema? Would you call it more from the point of view more as socially relevant films, or he makes films from his point of view? It's more or less his point of view.
Well, you see, Dev Anand's always made his kind of films. This almost it's like a stamp that he has put, which means that's his style. That's a certain kind of storytelling. It's very typical of Dev Anand, whether it is films that he made 50 years ago or whether the films he made now in recent years. So he has had this kind of ability for a very, very long time. And when I say his kind of films, I really mean his sensibility. You see, his style is in his sensibility. And those kind of films he's been making for a long time.
today is still working in the industry, still planning to make a film, and he is making so many films. His indestructible source of energy, and that that whole enthusiasm that he has.
That is wonderful, you know. His youthful vigor comes from his being active and busy. You know, he's a lesson to us all because you have to keep busy. You have to keep your mind active. You have to keep yourself physically active. You must have a mind that is constantly processing new ideas, putting together, making some cogent sense out of it and a narrative, and so that you can make a film of it. And he's been doing that for years, you know, and he's now into his 80s and he's still, I mean, he's nowhere close to giving it all up.
Going back to those days, again I'll talk about Guru Dutt. Their alliance, Guru Dutt and Dev Anand, their alliance did come up with some very relevant.
Who's an alliance?
Guru Dutt and Dev Anand.
Guru Dutt.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. I mean, you look at the films that they made together. They made Bazi, they made Jal. Then after that, I think, what was the film that was Taxi Driver? And then something else, two, three other films that they made together. They were all very good films. They were all very successful films. And they also had glorious music in all of them.
Their working relation is.
I have no idea what their working relationship was because I never had an into that part. Although of course that's my cousin and all that, but the fact was I really didn't know.
Do you think film stars like Dev Anand?
Which one?
Stars like Dev Anand.
Mhm.
Talking about Dev Anand, if they came into more of an the offbeat cinema that we talk about, if they just did more of those kind of cinema, do you think it would have been a different story for offbeat cinema in India?
Clearly, because you see, it's a very interesting study in contrast between Dev Anand and his older brother, Chetanand. The Chetanand tended to make films that were much more serious. You know, in fact, he started with a film called, what was it called? It was Nicha Nagar, for instance, was a film that he made, which was our entry at the Cannes Film Festival way back in 1946. Now, he made films of that nature, which were critically very successful, not always successful at the box office, but he didn't care, you know, he was a very different kind of filmmaker. Dev Anand's style has been completely different from his older brother's style of filmmaking. They have their own very distinct characteristics. Dev Anand was much more in the popular mode and the popular genre of filmmaking.
Lastly, how important Dev Anand, the whole legend Dev Anand, is for the Indian film industry?
Well, see, as far as the Indian film industry is concerned, he held the Indian film industry in thrall, along with Raj Kapoor and Dilip Kumar, for at least 3.5, 4 decades. It's quite extraordinary that you can have success of that kind, which really is only now been, that kind of record has been broken by someone like Amitabh Bachchan, because he just, everybody else's record was surpassed by him. But Dev's work finds a place in Indian film industry without question.